Show me your tickets again. I don't believe you belong here, Janet snapped, waving the boarding passes like counterfeit bills. Passengers looked on, some recording, unaware that the three black triplets she tried to humiliate weren't just ordinary kids. They were heirs to the very airline she worked for, and her cruelty was about to cost her everything. Her arms are crossed, her face twisted with the kind of prejudice that makes your stomach turn. But here's what will blow your mind. Instead of crying, instead of shrinking back in fear, these three girls simply look at each other, composed. They exchange a glance that says everything. She really has no idea who she's messing with. Janet Morrison, the flight attendant spewing this venom, is about to learn the most expensive lesson of her entire life. Because those three little girls she just humiliated, they own the airline she works for. Let me tell you exactly how this woman destroyed her career in less than 60 seconds, and why what happened next became the most satisfying moment of justice you'll ever witness. Welcome back to Black and Bruised Stories. If you're new here, you've just joined a community dedicated to truth, justice, and survival. Show some love by clicking the like and subscribe button. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. This is Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson. Three names that are about to trend worldwide, but right now they're just sitting quietly in their first-class seats, dressed in matching navy blazers, their hair perfectly styled. To anyone else, they look like well-behaved kids heading to visit family. But these aren't just any children. These are the daughters of Edward Thompson, the CEO and majority shareholder of Skyline Airways. Yes, the exact same airline where Janet Morrison just made the biggest mistake of her pathetic career. You see, the Thompson girls were raised completely differently from your typical billionaire kids. While other wealthy children flaunt designer everything and demand special treatment, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria were taught something revolutionary: humility. Their parents made absolutely sure they understood that respect is earned through character, not purchased with credit cards. Every single quarter, these girls have a beautiful tradition. They surprise their father at board meetings, sitting quietly in the back, absorbing how real business works. It's Edward Thompson's way of preparing his daughters for the empire they'll inherit someday. Today was supposed to be just another one of those learning experiences, but Edward had no idea his daughters were even on the plane. He was drowning in the biggest crisis of his business career, a vicious, hostile takeover attempt that threatened to destroy everything he'd built from the ground up. Emergency meetings, desperate phone calls, millions of dollars hanging by a thread. The last thing he could have imagined was that his three precious daughters were about to face the ugliest kind of discrimination on one of his own aircraft. Here's the brilliant part. The girls' tickets were booked under their mother's maiden name, Johnson, another one of those humility lessons their parents insisted on. No special treatment. No. Do you know who my father is? Nonsense. They earned respect through their behavior, not their bloodline. But when Janet Morrison saw those three young black faces in her first-class cabin, she saw something completely different. Janet had been working for Skyline Airways for 8 long years. 8 years of serving champagne to executives. 8 years of fake smiles for wealthy passengers. 8 years of thinking she knew exactly who belonged in first class and who was just pretending to belong. The second, and I mean the exact second, Janet's eyes landed on Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria, her entire demeanor transformed. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly, like someone had ripped off a mask to reveal the monster underneath. Her professional smile died, replaced by pure, undiluted hatred. And then she said those 2 words that exposed her rotten soul to everyone within earshot. Of course, figures, not welcome to Skyline Airways, not how can I assist you today. Just raw, disgusting prejudice wrapped up in 2 words that told passengers everything they needed to know about who Janet Morrison really was. Here's what makes this even more infuriating. It had nothing to do with the girls' behavior. Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria had been perfect passengers. Polite, quiet, well-dressed, respectful. They'd done absolutely nothing except commit the unforgivable sin of existing, while black in a space where Janet decided they didn't belong. But Janet had no clue what kind of storm she just unleashed. She didn't know that this wasn't just any board meeting Edward Thompson was rushing to attend. This hostile takeover was massive. Competitors were circling like hungry sharks, looking for any weakness, any scandal, any excuse to claim Skyline Airways was poorly managed and ripe for destruction. Captain Rodriguez was in the cockpit, completely focused on his pre-flight routine. This man had flown the Thompson family dozens of times over the years. Edward Thompson wasn't like other Zeiss. He actually knew his employees' names, asked about their children, genuinely cared about the people who made his company successful. Rodriguez had nothing but respect for the man. If Captain Rodriguez had known the Thompson girls were in his cabin, he would have personally made sure they were treated like the royalty they actually were. But he had no idea. Nobody did. The other first-class passengers were settling in, checking phones, opening laptops, completely oblivious to the fact that they were about to witness one of the most spectacular career implosions in aviation history. Businessmen, families, travelers, all of them just trying to get somewhere, with no idea they were about to become witnesses to a discrimination disaster that would make international headlines. The plane doors sealed, engines roared to life, and somewhere in that first-class cabin, three 12-year-old girls who literally owned the metal tube they were sitting in, prepared to face hatred that would shock the entire world. Janet Morrison was about to discover that racist assumptions don't just hurt other people, they can obliterate your entire existence in a matter of minutes. But what these incredible girls did next didn't just shut her up, it changed everything. If you're already furious about what you've heard so far, smash that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen discrimination this blatant? What would you have done if you were sitting in that cabin? Because the revenge these three girls delivered was absolutely perfect. Now here's where Janet Morrison made her second catastrophic mistake. You'd think after that opening insult she might back down, maybe realize she'd crossed a line. But no, this woman was just getting started on the most spectacular career suicide in aviation history. The triplets' response to her venomous question was nothing short of masterful. Instead of getting defensive, instead of raising their voices, Sophia simply looked up at Janet with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. "We're here on business," she said quietly, her voice steady as steel. "Family business." That should have been Janet's cue to apologize, to back away, to recognize that maybe she'd made an assumption she shouldn't have. But watching Janet's face at that moment was like watching someone's soul rot in real time. The calm, dignified response from a 12-year-old girl didn't humble her. It enraged her. You could see the wheels turning in Janet's twisted mind. How dare these children speak to her with such composure? How dare they not cower under her authority? In her warped worldview, their confidence was somehow offensive, their dignity somehow threatening. So Janet doubled down in the most disgusting way possible. "Oh, really?" Janet's voice dripped with sarcasm as she towered over the seated girls. "Well, let me tell you something, sweethearts. First class is usually for professionals, not playtime. This isn't a daycare center where you can pretend to be important." The insult hit the cabin like a slap. Passengers who had been minding their own business suddenly looked up from their phones and laptops. The businessman across the aisle lowered his Wall Street Journal. The elderly woman near the window stopped adjusting her seat. You could feel the atmosphere shift as people realized they weren't just witnessing poor customer service. They were watching something much darker unfold. But Janet wasn't finished. Oh no, she was just warming up for the performance that would destroy her life. "I hope you can keep up in this section," she continued, her voice getting louder, making sure everyone could hear her humiliate three children. "The service here requires a certain level of sophistication." The way she said sophistication, like it was some exclusive club these girls could never hope to join, made several passengers visibly uncomfortable. A woman in seat 2B started reaching for her phone. The man behind the triplets stopped typing on his laptop and began listening intently. But here's what made this whole scene even more incredible. Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria just looked at each other again. Not with fear, not with anger, but with that same knowing expression, like they were watching a comedy show where only they understood the punchline. Olivia, the middle sister, actually smiled slightly and whispered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "She really doesn't know, does she?" That whisper traveled through first class like wildfire. Passengers started exchanging glances. What didn't this flight attendant know? Who were these girls that could remain so calm under such vicious attack? Janet heard the whisper too, and it sent her into an absolute frenzy. How dare these children act like they knew something she didn't? How dare they remain composed when she was trying to put them in their place? What happened next was Janet's third massive mistake. She decided to turn this into a public spectacle. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Janet announced to the entire first-class cabin, her voice now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I need to verify some boarding passes. Some passengers seem to be confused about their seat assignments." The audacity was breathtaking. Janet was now involving innocent passengers in her racist crusade, making them uncomfortable witnesses to her discrimination. She marched back to the triplets with her hand extended like a police officer demanding identification. "Boarding passes, and I'll need to see them again to make sure everything is legitimate." Sophia, still maintaining that supernatural calm, reached into her small purse and handed over their boarding passes. But Janet wasn't satisfied with just looking at them once. She studied them like she was examining counterfeit bills, holding them up to the light, checking every detail twice, 3 times. "These are first-class tickets," Janet announced loudly, as if she discovered some sort of fraud. "Very expensive first-class tickets. I just want to make sure everything is in order." The implication was clear as crystal. There was no way these 3 black girls could legitimately afford first-class seats. In Janet's racist mind, their presence here had to be some sort of mistake, some sort of scam, some sort of charity case that needed to be exposed. But what Janet didn't realize was that she was being watched, not just by the increasingly uncomfortable passengers, but by some very important people she should have been worried about. Patricia Hayes, sitting in seat 1A, was no ordinary passenger. She was a board member of Skyline Airways, heading to the same emergency meeting as Edward Thompson. Patricia had been with the company for 15 years, had watched it grow from a small regional carrier to an international powerhouse. She'd sat in countless boardrooms with Edward Thompson, had even met his family at company events. But from her angle, Patricia couldn't quite see the girls' faces clearly. She could hear the commotion, could see Janet's increasingly aggressive behavior, but she hadn't yet made the connection that would turn this from a customer service nightmare into a corporate crisis. Meanwhile, in seat 3C, tech journalist David Kim was having the story of his career drop right into his lap. David specialized in corporate culture pieces, had written exposés on discrimination in major companies, and his antenna for injustice was going off like a fire alarm. At first, David thought he was just witnessing a standard case of airline rudeness. But as Janet's behavior escalated, as her language became more loaded, as her volume increased, David realized he was watching something much more significant. He quietly activated his phone's recording app and began documenting what would soon become the most damaging corporate PR disaster in recent history. Janet, completely oblivious to the career-ending evidence being compiled against her, decided to escalate even further. She returned to the triplets with their boarding passes. But instead of handing them back, she waved them in the air like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. "I'm going to need to verify these with my supervisor," she announced. "Sometimes there are irregularities 0 with certain types of passengers." The racist dog whistle was so loud it might as well have been a foghorn. Every single passenger in first class now understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't about boarding passes or seat assignments or airline policy. This was about 3 young black girls being targeted because of the color of their skin. That's when Victoria, the youngest, but perhaps the wisest of the 3, made the observation that would haunt Janet Morrison for the rest of her life. Looking directly at Janet with those calm, knowing eyes, Victoria said in a voice so clear and composed it cut through all the chaos, "Funny, isn't it? How someone's entire day can be ruined by something as small as skin color." The cabin fell silent. Passengers stopped pretending to look at their phones. The businessman folded his newspaper completely. Even the flight's engine noise seemed to fade as those words hung in the air like truth serum. Victoria had just called out Janet's racism with surgical precision, using the kind of wisdom and dignity that most adults never achieve. A 12-year-old girl had just delivered the most devastating indictment of prejudice that anyone in that cabin had ever heard. But instead of shame, instead of recognition, instead of the moment of clarity that might have saved her career, Janet Morrison chose to reveal her true character to the entire world. Her face went red, her hands started shaking, and then she exploded like a bomb that had been waiting to detonate for years. "Listen here, you little nobodies," Janet screamed, her voice now loud enough for passengers in economy to hear. "I don't need life lessons from children who don't even belong here. You think you're so smart, so special, but you're not. You're nothing." The cabin atmosphere went from uncomfortable to absolutely electric. Passengers were now openly staring, many with their phones out, recording every word of Janet's meltdown. This wasn't just poor customer service anymore. This was a full-scale breakdown happening at 30,000 ft. "Words are cheap," Janet continued screaming, completely unaware that she was destroying herself in front of dozens of witnesses. "You can sit there acting all calm and superior, but I've worked here for 8 years. The years this airline needs me. They can't do without me." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was Janet Morrison proclaiming her indispensability to Skyline Airways while actively committing the kind of discrimination that would make the company liable for millions in lawsuits. She was essentially arguing for her own importance while providing evidence for her own termination. Patricia Hayes, the board member, was now paying full attention to the commotion. Something about those 3 girls was nagging at the back of her mind. The way they carried themselves, the way they responded to aggression with such maturity. Something was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Tech journalist David Kim was having the opposite problem. He knew exactly what he was witnessing and couldn't believe his luck. This was the kind of story that defines careers, the kind of corporate scandal that leads to policy changes and executive resignations. His phone was capturing every word of Janet's racist rant. But the most amazing part of this entire disaster was still the triplets themselves. While Janet Morrison was having the most public breakdown in airline history, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria remained unnaturally calm. Not the fake calm of people trying to hide their fear, but the genuine composure of people who knew something no one else did. Other passengers were starting to whisper among themselves. "Who are these girls? How are they staying so calm? What aren't we seeing here?" The whispers grew louder. Phones came out more openly. Social media posts started getting typed. Skyline Airways began trending in real time as passengers shared videos of what they were witnessing. Janet, completely oblivious to the digital documentation of her career suicide, kept ranting about her importance to the airline, about how these nobody children didn't deserve to share the same air as real first-class passengers, about how she was going to make sure they never flew Skyline Airways again. Every word was another nail in her professional coffin. Every insult was more evidence for the lawsuit that was already building. Every racist comment was being preserved forever in digital format, ready to be shared with the world. But the triplets just sat there watching Janet destroy herself with expressions that seemed to say, "We tried to warn you. We tried to be kind, but you chose hate instead." The storm Janet had started was about to become a hurricane that would sweep away everything she thought she knew about power, privilege, and who really controlled her destiny. But she had no idea that the 3 nobody children she was screaming at were about to reveal a truth that would change everything. What do you think Janet's face looked like when she discovered who these girls really were? Drop a comment and let me know if you've ever seen karma this perfectly timed. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. What happened next was the most beautiful moment of karma you will ever witness in your entire life. Janet Morrison standing there in all her racist glory, having just screamed at 3 12-year-old girls that they're nobodies who don't belong in first class. She's breathing heavily, her face flushed with anger and hatred, completely convinced she's just put these children in their place. The entire first-class cabin is dead silent. Passengers are staring with a mixture of shock and disgust. Phones are recording, social media posts are being typed, and Janet, completely oblivious to the career-ending evidence mounting against her, is actually smiling with satisfaction. But then something extraordinary happens. Something that will be replayed millions of times across every social media platform on Earth. Sophia Thompson, the eldest of the triplets, slowly rises from her seat. Not frantically, not aggressively, not with any of the drama that Janet had been spewing for the past 20 minutes. She stands with the kind of quiet dignity that commands respect, The kind of presence that instantly makes everyone in the room pay attention. At 12 years old, Sophia carries herself like royalty. Not the fake entitled kind of royalty that comes from money, but the real kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and never apologizing for it. Her posture is perfect. Her expression is calm. And when she speaks, her voice carries the weight of absolute truth. "You're right about one thing," Sophia says, looking directly into Janet's eyes with a composure that would make seasoned executives jealous. The cabin is so quiet you could hear a pin drop 30,000 FT above the ground. Janet's expression starts to shift. Something in Sophia's tone, something in her presence is making the racist flight attendant realize that maybe she's miscalculated something fundamental about this situation. Sophia continues, each word delivered with surgical precision. Words are cheap. The pause, the kind of pause that builds anticipation and dread in equal measure. But ownership isn't. Another pause. Janet's face starts to show the first cracks of uncertainty. And then Sophia delivers the nuclear bomb that obliterates Janet Morrison's entire world. "This airline is our family's. The silence that follows is deafening. It's like someone pressed pause on reality itself. Passengers freeze with their phones halfway to their faces. The businessman's jaw literally drops open. The elderly woman gasps audibly. Even the airplane's engine noise seems to fade into background static for a moment that stretches like eternity. Nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The revelation hangs in the air like a truth so shocking, so completely devastating that human brains need time to process what they've just heard. Janet Morrison, the woman who has spent the last 20 minutes humiliating 3 nobody children, just discovered that those children own the company she works for. The airline she claimed to be indispensable to belongs to the family she's been terrorizing. Janet's face goes through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and then pure, unadulterated panic. Her mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air. Her hands start trembling. The color drains from her face so fast it's like watching someone's soul leave their body in real time. That's impossible," Janet stammers, her voice suddenly small and pathetic. All her earlier bravado has evaporated like morning fog. "No, you're lying. You have to be lying." But even as the words come out of her mouth, Janet knows the truth. She can see it in Sophia's confident posture, in the way all 3 girls are looking at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. She can feel it in the suddenly electric atmosphere of the cabin, where passengers are realizing they've just witnessed the most spectacular case of foot and mouth disease in aviation history. That's when Patricia Hayes, the board member sitting in seat 1A, suddenly sits bolt upright like she's been struck by lightning. The faces, the names, the quiet confidence, it all clicks into place like puzzle pieces falling from the sky. "Oh my God," Patricia whispers loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Sophia, Olivia, Victoria, you're Edward Thompson's daughters." Patricia's recognition ripples through the cabin like a shockwave. Other passengers start putting the pieces together. The Thompson name is legendary in business circles, and Edward Thompson's transformation from foster kid to airline mogul is the kind of American dream story that gets featured on magazine covers. But more importantly, Patricia knows these girls personally. She sat in boardrooms with their father, has heard him talk about his daughters with the kind of pride that makes hardened executives get misty-eyed. She's seen family photos on Edward's desk, has listened to him brag about Sophia's volunteer work at children's hospitals, Olivia's coding competitions, Victoria's debate team victories. Patricia Hayes, who has been silent during Janet's entire racist tirade, realizes she's been watching a Skyline Airways employee abuse the children of her CEO. Her face goes pale as she understands the magnitude of what she's witnessed and her own failure to intervene. Meanwhile, tech journalist David Kim is having what can only be described as a professional orgasm. He's been recording this entire interaction, and now he realizes he hasn't just captured some random customer service dispute. He's documented a major corporate scandal in real time. His mind is already racing through headlines. Skyline Airways employee attacks his children. Racist flight attendant humiliates boss's daughters. Corporate discrimination caught on camera. David starts typing frantically on his phone. uploading videos to every platform he can think of: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. Within minutes, the footage of Janet's racist breakdown is starting to spread across the internet like wildfire. But Janet Morrison, standing there in the middle of her career's funeral, is still trying to deny reality. Her racist worldview is so deeply ingrained that she literally cannot accept that 3 young black girls could own anything, let alone a major airline. "Your kids," Janet says desperately, grasping at straws. "Kids don't own airlines. This is some kind of joke, some kind of setup." Sophia doesn't even need to respond. She just looks at Janet with the kind of patient expression you'd give to someone who's having a complete mental breakdown, which, let's be honest, is exactly what's happening. That's when the real fireworks begin. Olivia, who has been quietly observing this whole disaster with the analytical mind of a tech genius, pulls out her phone and opens a group text with her mother. Her fingers fly across the screen. "Mom, we have a situation on the plane. Flight attendant has been discriminating against us for 20 minutes. It's all being recorded. Dad needs to know now." The text goes through at 35,000 FT thanks to the plane's Wi-Fi, and within seconds it lands in the phone of Dr. Sarah Thompson, the woman who helped build Skyline Airways alongside her husband. Sarah's in her office at the Children's Hospital where she works as chief of pediatric surgery, but when she sees that text, everything else becomes background noise. Sarah immediately calls the emergency line at Skyline Airways headquarters. Not the customer service line, not the complaints department, the direct emergency line that connects straight to the executive suite. "This is Sarah Thompson," she says when the call connects. "My daughters are being discriminated against by one of your flight attendants on flight SA-847. I need my husband contacted immediately, and I need that employee suspended before this becomes national news." The headquarters executive who takes the call feels his stomach drop into his shoes. The COS daughters being discriminated against by their own employee is the kind of nightmare scenario that makes corporate lawyers wake up in cold sweats. He immediately patches Sarah through to the flight's communication system and simultaneously sends an emergency alert to Edward Thompson's assistant. Meanwhile, in the emergency board meeting that Edward Thompson is attending, his phone buzzes with the kind of urgent alert that stops everything. His assistant slips him a note. "Your daughters are on flight SA-847, and there's an incident involving discrimination by flight crew. Your wife is on the emergency line." Edward Thompson, the man who built an airline empire from nothing, feels his blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. He immediately steps out of the boardroom and patches into the flight's communication system, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes grown executives tremble. At the same time, Captain Rodriguez in the cockpit receives an emergency communication from headquarters that makes his blood run cold. He's been flying for Skyline Airways for 12 years, has personally flown the Thompson family dozens of times, and the idea that someone on his crew has been discriminating against the CEO's daughters makes him physically ill. Rodriguez immediately patches into the cabin intercom system, his voice carrying into first class where Janet Morrison is still trying to deny reality. "Flight attendant Morrison, report to the front of the aircraft immediately. We have an urgent communication from headquarters." But the real chaos is happening back at Skyline Airways headquarters, where the social media monitoring team is watching their worst nightmare unfold in real time. David Kim's videos are spreading faster than a California wildfire, with hashtags like Debrecen Skyline Scandal and Urea Racist Flight Attendant trending on multiple platforms simultaneously. The company's stock price, which was already under pressure from the hostile takeover attempt, starts fluctuating wildly as investors react to the unfolding scandal. Trading algorithms pick up the negative sentiment and begin automated selling. Within minutes, Skyline Airways has lost millions in market value because one racist employee couldn't control her prejudice. Janet Morrison, still standing in the middle of first class like a deer caught in headlights, finally starts to understand the magnitude of her mistake. The color has completely drained from her face, and she's beginning to shake like a leaf in a hurricane. But the most incredible part of this entire meltdown is still Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria themselves. While Janet's world crumbles around her, while corporate executives scramble to contain the damage, while social media explodes with outrage, the 3 girls just sit there with the same calm composure they've maintained throughout this entire ordeal. They're not gloating, they're not screaming, I told you so. They're not even angry anymore. They just look sad. Sad that an adult chose hatred over humanity. Sad that someone could be so blinded by prejudice that they destroy their own life, rather than treat children with basic dignity. Sophia sits back down, looks at her sisters and says quietly, "We try to give her a chance to do the right thing." Olivia nods and adds, "Some people choose hate even when kindness costs nothing." And Victoria, the youngest but perhaps the wisest, observes, "Now everyone gets to see what racism really costs." The three of them settle back into their seats, knowing that what happens next isn't really about them anymore. They've maintained their dignity throughout this entire attack. They've shown more maturity than most adults ever will. They've proven that grace under pressure isn't about age, it's about character. Janet Morrison, meanwhile, is about to learn that discrimination doesn't just hurt the people you target, it destroys the person doing the discriminating. Her 8-year career is about to become a cautionary tale told in corporate training sessions for decades to come. The cabin is still silent, but now it's a different kind of silence. It's the silence of people realizing they've witnessed something that will be talked about for years. It's the silence of passengers understanding that they've just seen the most perfect example of karma in action. And somewhere in that silence, you can almost hear the sound of Janet Morrison's career, dying a very public, very deserved death. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice backfire this spectacularly? Let me know in the comments what you think Janet's next move should be. And make sure you subscribe, because what happens next will blow your mind completely. What happens next is the most satisfying moment of justice you'll ever witness. Janet Morrison standing in that first-class cabin, her entire world crashing down around her, finally understanding that she just spent 20 minutes racially abusing the daughters of her own seal. Her face has gone from racist confidence to absolute terror, and she's about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone, some words can't be taken back, and some careers can't be saved. The silence in the cabin is deafening. 40 passengers are staring at Janet like she's an alien species they've never encountered before. Phones are recording her meltdown from every angle. Social media is exploding with her racist tirade. And Janet Morrison, the woman who thought she was untouchable, is beginning to understand that she's just committed professional suicide in the most public way possible. That's when Captain Rodriguez's voice cuts through the cabin air like a sword of justice. The intercom crackles to life with the kind of authority that makes everyone instantly pay attention. His voice is steady, professional, but underneath you can hear barely controlled anger. "Flight Attendant Morrison, report to the cockpit immediately." 7 words, just 7 simple words that everyone in first class knows mean one thing and one thing only. Janet Morrison is done. Finished. Her career just died in front of 40 witnesses at 35,000 FT. The passengers exchange knowing glances. In airline culture, when a crew member gets called to the cockpit during a flight, it's never good news. But when it happens immediately after that crew member has been caught discriminating against passengers, everyone knows exactly what's about to happen. Janet's legs start shaking. She tries to speak, tries to say something, anything, but the words won't come. Her mouth opens and closes like she's drowning in air. The confident, racist flight attendant who was screaming at children just minutes ago has been replaced by a terrified woman who finally understands the magnitude of her mistake. But before Janet can even take a step toward the cockpit, another voice comes through the intercom. This one is different, deeper, more authoritative, carrying the kind of power that makes corporate executives around the world recognize it instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Edward Thompson II of Skyline Airways." The cabin atmosphere goes from tense to absolutely electric. Passengers straighten in their seats. Phones pivot toward the speakers. Everyone realizes they're about to hear something historic. A CEO personally addressing a discrimination incident involving his own children in real time. "I want to personally address what has happened on this flight today," Edward continues, his voice carrying across the cabin with the weight of absolute authority. "I have been informed that my 3 daughters, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson, have been subjected to discriminatory treatment by one of our employees." Janet Morrison looks like she's about to faint. The color has completely drained from her face, and she's swaying slightly like she might collapse right there in the aisle. She's hearing her boss, her ultimate boss, the man who signs her paychecks, talking about the children she just spent 20 minutes racially abusing. Edward Thompson's voice continues, and now there's something else in it. Pride. Genuine, overwhelming pride in his daughters. I want everyone on this flight to know how incredibly proud I am of Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria. In the face of unacceptable discrimination, they have shown grace, dignity, and maturity that far exceeds that of many adults. They have represented our family and our values with honor. The passengers start looking at the triplets with new eyes. These aren't just three kids who got mistreated. These are three young women who maintain their composure under the kind of racist attack that would make most adults lose their minds. They sat there, took the abuse, never raised their voices, never lost their dignity, and then delivered the most devastating comeback in aviation history. Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria just sit there listening to their father's words with the same calm composure they've maintained throughout this entire ordeal. They're not smirking, not gloating, not celebrating Janet's downfall. They look almost sad that it came to this. But Janet Morrison is having a complete breakdown. The reality of her situation is finally hitting her like a freight train. She just racially abused the Zoe children on his own airline in front of dozens of witnesses while being recorded on multiple phones, with a board member watching with a tech journalist documenting everything. Janet tries to move toward the triplets, her hands shaking, her voice cracking with desperation. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I never meant. But Sophia holds up a hand with the kind of quiet authority that stops Janet dead in her tracks. The 12-year-old girl looks at the grown woman who just spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate her, and her expression is heartbreaking. Not angry, not vindictive, just deeply disappointed in humanity. You meant every word, Sophia says quietly, her voice carrying across the silent cabin. You didn't attack us because you didn't know who we were. You attacked us because of who you thought we were, and that says everything about who you are. The truth hits Janet like a slap across the face. Sophia is absolutely right. Janet didn't discriminate against them because she was confused about their identity. She discriminated against them because she saw three young black girls in first class and decided they didn't belong there. The racism was the point, not a mistake. Janet tries again, more desperately. Please, I have a family. I need this job. I can change. I can do better. But Olivia, the middle sister, responds with the kind of wisdom that makes everyone in the cabin realize these aren't ordinary children. You had 20 minutes to do better. You had 20 minutes to choose kindness over cruelty. You chose cruelty every single time. And then Victoria, the youngest, delivers the final blow. Our skin color didn't change during this flight. Your treatment of us got worse as you learned we wouldn't be intimidated. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Three 12-year-old girls have just delivered a masterclass in dignity, grace, and truth-telling that most adults could never achieve. They've taken the worst kind of discrimination and responded with the kind of composure that would make philosophers proud. Janet Morrison collapses into a nearby seat, finally understanding that there's no way back from this. She's not just losing her job, she's becoming a cautionary tale. Her racist rant is already spreading across social media faster than she can comprehend. Her name is being attached to discrimination and hatred in a way that will follow her forever. Captain Rodriguez's voice comes back over the intercom. Flight Attendant Morrison, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Please gather your belongings and report to the galley where you will remain for the rest of this flight. It's over. 8 years of employment gone, a career in aviation finished, the reputation destroyed, all because Janet Morrison couldn't see three young black girls without letting her racism poison her judgment. As Janet slowly stands to walk toward the galley, passengers start whispering among themselves. You can hear fragments of conversation throughout the cabin. She ruined her own career just because of skin color. Those girls handled that better than most adults would. I can't believe someone could be that racist in 2024. She literally destroyed herself over her own prejudice. The whispers follow Janet like a funeral procession as she walks the longest walk of her professional life. Every step toward the galley is another step away from the career she thought was secure. The job she claimed the airline couldn't survive without her. But the triplets, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria, just settle back into their seats with their dignity completely intact. They've been through a racist attack that would traumatize most people, and they've emerged not just unbroken, but victorious. Not because they wanted revenge, but because they refused to let hatred change who they are. Sophia looks out the airplane window at the clouds below and makes an observation that will be quoted for years to come. Funny how hate costs so much more than kindness. The simplicity of that statement hits everyone who hears it. Janet Morrison just lost everything: her job, her reputation, her future, all because she couldn't manage the basic human decency to treat 3 children with respect. Meanwhile, those children have gained the admiration of everyone who witnessed their grace under pressure. While Sophia is making philosophical observations, the digital world is exploding with Janet's downfall. Tech journalist David Kim's videos are going viral across every platform imaginable. Janet Morrison is trending on Twitter. Skyline scandal has millions of views on TikTok. Yucker racist flight attendant is spreading faster than any corporate PR team could possibly contain. The videos show everything. Janet's initial racist questioning, her escalating insults, her explosive rant about being indispensable, the triplets' calm responses, and the devastating moment when Sophia revealed they own the airline. It's the most complete documentation of racist karma in internet history. People are sharing the videos with commentary that ranges from outrage to amazement. This flight attendant just racially abused the SOS daughters on his own plane. Watch these 3 girls handle racism with more class than most adults. The moment when she realizes she just destroyed her career is priceless. Those children are going to change the world someday. Meanwhile, back at Skyline Airways headquarters, the corporate crisis team is in full meltdown mode. The company's social media accounts are being flooded with comments. The stock price is in freefall. Legal is preparing for potential lawsuits. HR is processing the fastest termination in company history. But the most telling response is coming from Edward Thompson himself. Instead of just damage control, instead of just apologizing for his employees' behavior, he's turning this into a teaching moment about dignity, respect, and how his daughters represent the values he wants his company to embody. The hostile takeover that threatened Skyline Airways this morning suddenly seems less important than the lesson about character that's playing out on flight SA-847. The business world is watching as so children demonstrate more leadership and composure than most boardrooms ever see. Janet Morrison, sitting alone in the galley, finally starts to understand what those girls meant when they kept saying she didn't know who she was messing with. It wasn't a threat about wealth or power. It was a statement about character. She was attacking children who had been raised to respond to hatred with dignity, to meet discrimination with grace, to answer cruelty with wisdom. And now, as the plane continues toward its destination, Janet has hours to sit alone and contemplate how 20 minutes of racism just cost her everything she thought she couldn't lose. Her career is over, her reputation is destroyed, her future is uncertain. All because she couldn't treat 3 children with the basic respect that every human being deserves. The triplets, meanwhile, are probably already thinking about what they'll tell their father when they see him. Not about revenge, not about punishment for Janet, but about what this experience taught them about courage, about standing up to bullies, about maintaining your dignity when someone tries to take it away. The most incredible part of this entire story isn't that racism got exposed. It's that 3 12-year-old girls showed the entire world what real strength looks like. Not screaming, not fighting back, not letting hatred turn them hateful, but standing firm in who they are and letting the truth speak for itself. What do you think Janet Morrison's next career move should be after destroying herself completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments and make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the aftermath of this story gets even more unbelievable. What happens next proves that sometimes the universe delivers justice so perfectly, so completely that it almost seems like divine intervention. While Janet Morrison sits isolated in the back of the plane, contemplating the ruins of her career, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson are about to walk into the most important business meeting in Skyline Airways history and completely transform it. The plane touches down exactly on schedule, but nothing about this arrival is ordinary. News crews are already stationed at the airport, because word has spread about the viral discrimination incident. Social media has turned these three 12-year-old girls into instant symbols of dignity under pressure, and Janet Morrison into a cautionary tale about the true cost of racism. As the triplets walk off the plane with their heads held high, maintaining that same incredible composure they've shown throughout this entire ordeal, Janet Morrison is escorted off separately through a service exit like the career criminal she's become. The contrast is stark and symbolic. The girls walking proudly into their future, while Janet skulks away from the wreckage of hers. But the real fireworks are about to begin in the Skyline Airways boardroom, where Edward Thompson is dealing with a hostile takeover attempt that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. The emergency board meeting that was supposed to focus on corporate raiders is about to become something entirely different, a defining moment about corporate values and ethical leadership. Edward Thompson stands at the head of the polished conference table, surrounded by board members, lawyers, financial advisors, and the vultures trying to take over his company. The atmosphere is tense, filled with the kind of corporate warfare that destroys careers and erases legacies. Millions of dollars hang in the balance, and everyone in the room knows it. But then the conference room doors open, and Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson walk in with their quiet dignity intact. The room falls silent as board members realize these are the children who just faced down racist discrimination with more grace than most adults could ever muster. Edward Thompson's face transforms when he sees his daughters. The stress, the anger, the corporate pressure, it all melts away as he looks at these three incredible young women who just taught the world what real strength looks like. He crosses the room and embraces them, and you can see in his eyes that no hostile takeover, no corporate crisis, no business emergency could ever matter as much as his children's well-being. Before we continue with any other business, Edward announces to the room, I want every person in this boardroom to understand what just happened on one of our aircraft. My daughters were subjected to the most vicious racist discrimination I've ever witnessed, and they handled it with more dignity and wisdom than most of the executives I work with. The board members shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Patricia Hayes, who witnessed the entire incident, begins describing what she saw. The systematic harassment, the escalating racism, the complete professional meltdown of a Skyline Airways employee. Her voice shakes with emotion as she recounts how three children maintained their composure while an adult tried to destroy them. The corporate raiders who came here to argue about stock prices and profit margins suddenly realize they're in a room with living examples of the values they're trying to attack. How do you argue for a hostile takeover when the Sioux children just proved that character matters more than quarterly earnings? This incident, Edward continues, has shown me exactly who we are as a company and who we want to be. Any organization that employs someone capable of racially abusing children is an organization that needs fundamental change. The room erupts into immediate action. Board members who were divided on corporate strategy suddenly unite around something more important, making sure this never happens again. An emergency vote is called not about the hostile takeover, but about Janet Morrison's immediate termination with cause. The vote is unanimous and swift. Janet Morrison, who hours ago was claiming the airline couldn't survive without her, is officially terminated for gross misconduct, discrimination, in violation of every corporate policy Skyline Airways has ever written. But it doesn't stop there. The board's legal counsel explains that termination for discrimination violations means Janet won't just lose her job. She'll lose her unemployment benefits, her severance package, her health care coverage, and any possibility of positive references. Her racist rant has cost her everything she thought employment provided. Meanwhile, something extraordinary is happening outside the boardroom. Social media is exploding with support for Skyline Airways' response to the discrimination incident. The videos of Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria handling racism with such incredible grace have touched millions of people worldwide. Skyline Values is trending globally as people praise the airline for standing behind their principles. The stock price, which had been falling due to the hostile takeover threat, suddenly reverses course and begins climbing rapidly. Investors are buying Skyline Airways stock not because of profit projections or quarterly reports, but because they want to invest in a company that stands for dignity, respect, and ethical leadership. The hostile takeover attempt, which seemed so threatening this morning, collapsed completely. Who wants to take over a company when the entire world is watching and supporting its ethical stance? The corporate raiders who came here to strip the company for parts suddenly find themselves facing a business that's stronger than ever. Backed by public support they never anticipated, Edward Thompson looks at his daughters and realizes that what started as his worst corporate crisis has become his greatest victory. Not because he defeated business rivals, but because his children showed the world what the Thompson family and Skyline Airways really stand for. But while the Thompsons are experiencing triumph, Janet Morrison's downfall is just beginning to accelerate in ways she never could have imagined. Within hours of her termination, Janet discovers that her racist rant hasn't just cost her this job. It's made her unemployable across the entire aviation industry. Airlines around the world are sharing the viral videos, using them as examples of exactly the kind of employee they never want to hire. Janet tries to apply for positions with other carriers, thinking maybe she can start over somewhere else, somewhere they haven't heard about her Skyline Airways meltdown. But the internet doesn't forget, and corporate HR departments don't ignore viral videos of discrimination. American Airlines application denied after background check reveals viral discrimination incident. Delta refuses to even interview her once they discover her identity. United sends form letters stating they don't hire employees with documented histories of passenger abuse. Southwest HR department recognizes her name from the viral videos and immediately rejects her application. Every major airline, every regional carrier, every aviation company in the country has seen the footage of Janet Morrison racially abusing 3 children. Her name has become toxic in an industry where customer service and professional conduct are everything. Janet tries to control the damage by posting desperate apology videos on her personal social media accounts. But every attempt at damage control just makes things worse. People in the comments section aren't buying her crocodile tears and forced remorse. They've seen the real Janet Morrison, the one who spent 25 minutes trying to humiliate children because of their skin color. Her former colleagues at Skyline Airways distance themselves from her like she's carrying a contagious disease. Flight attendants she worked with for years suddenly don't know her name. Pilots she used to chat with during layovers won't return her calls. Even the ground crew members who used to wave at her now look the other way when they see her at the airport. The airline industry is a surprisingly small world where everyone knows everyone and word travels fast. Janet Morrison's racist breakdown hasn't just cost her one job. It's made her persona non grata across an entire profession. But the social media consequences are perhaps the most devastating of all. The hashtags associated with her name aren't fading away. They're growing stronger. Dasher, Janet Morrison, racist trends for weeks. Your Skyline discrimination becomes a case study in corporate crisis management. Thompson Triplets becomes a symbol of dignity under pressure. People aren't just sharing the original videos. They're creating reaction videos, analysis pieces, and think pieces about racism in the workplace. Janet's 25 minutes of racist abuse become teaching moments in diversity training programs, college courses, and corporate workshops around the world. The financial consequences start piling up like an avalanche. Without unemployment benefits, without severance pay, without health care coverage, Janet's comfortable middle-class lifestyle begins crumbling. The mortgage on her suburban home suddenly seems insurmountable. The car payments become impossible. The credit card bills start accumulating. Meanwhile, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson quietly return to their normal lives. But their world has changed in ways they're only beginning to understand. They've become accidental heroes, symbols of grace under pressure, examples of how to respond to hatred with dignity. The girls don't seek attention or fame from their experience. They don't give interviews or appear on talk shows. They just go back to being 12-year-old kids who happen to be wise beyond their years. But the world hasn't forgotten what they did, and their impact continues to ripple outward in ways they may never fully comprehend. 6 months later, the contrast between Janet Morrison's life and the triplets' lives is so stark, it's almost unbelievable. Janet is sitting in the waiting room of a fast food restaurant, filling out an application for a minimum wage position. At 43 years old, with a mortgage to pay and bills piling up, she's applying to flip burgers and take orders from teenagers. The manager, a 25-year-old with a business degree, recognizes her name from the viral videos, and politely explains that they've decided to go with other candidates. Even McDonald's won't hire the woman who became the face of workplace racism. Janet's house is in foreclosure. Her car has been repossessed. Her credit rating has plummeted. Her marriage is strained to the breaking point. Her racist rant has cost her everything she spent decades building, and there's no way back from the hole she dug for herself. Meanwhile, Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria Thompson are gracing the covers of business magazines around the world. Not because of their father's success, but because of their own incredible demonstration of character under pressure. Forbes features them in an article about the next generation of ethical leaders. Time magazine includes them in their People Who Mattered issue. Harvard Business School requests interviews for a case study on dignity in crisis situations. The ultimate irony is breathtaking in its perfection. Janet Morrison's racism intended to humiliate and diminish these three children has instead made them more famous, more powerful, and more influential than they ever would have been otherwise. Her hatred has become the launching pad for their influence. Corporate training videos around the world now feature footage of Janet's racist breakdown as an example of what not to do. Her 25 minutes of discrimination have become educational tools used to teach millions of employees about respect, dignity, and professional conduct. But the videos also feature the triplets' responses, their calm wisdom, their graceful strength, their mature handling of adult hatred. Sophia, Olivia, and Victoria have become the gold standard for how to respond to discrimination with dignity intact. The final shot of our story shows the ultimate contrast. Janet Morrison, alone in her empty apartment, scrolling through job rejection emails on her phone, while simultaneously seeing news articles about the Thompson triplets being honored at youth leadership conferences around the world. Her racism didn't just fail to hurt these children. It elevated them to a platform where their voices and their example can inspire millions of people for generations to come. Meanwhile, her hatred destroyed the person who chose to embrace it. As the screen fades to black, one final truth emerges with crystal clarity. Racism doesn't just hurt the people it targets. It completely destroys the person who chooses to practice it. Janet Morrison learned this lesson in the most public, most permanent, most devastating way possible. And three 12-year-old girls proved that dignity, grace, and character will always triumph over hatred in the end. What do you think is the most important lesson from Janet's complete downfall? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if this story of perfect karma restored your faith in justice.